Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live. This is Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Stoicke with For Better, For Worse.
And Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about training and testing. And testing does not only mean trials or competitions, just testing what you've trained your dog for, right? And I think Lisa and Joanne can agree that a lot of us test a little too soon, and that's where sometimes the skills go awry, or the people feel like they're failing because a dog wasn't able to perform. So we wanted to kind of give you some tips about how to help your dog go from when to go from training to testing, and because it's not linear. You're going to train, test, then train again, and then test again, and train again, and test again. And that's kind of the whole process, right? But we tend to think, okay, we've trained for, I don't know, 2 weeks. The dog should know it now. Well, it doesn't really work like that. So that's kind of like what we wanted to talk about. I mean, testing is also competition, but we want to talk about other how to know when to move on in your training, whatever you're training, right? In your dog, and especially those of you who have young dogs, it's a little bit different process, and I think people tend to feel a little more um, like a failure if the dog doesn't know it or isn't able to perform it, and it just makes matters worse down the long term. Hi, Deb, Sue, Ronnie, Aaron. So that's kind of what we wanted to kind of address today, a little bit more about that, right? If you have if you're trying to, let's make it simple. Let's say a sit, right? You've trained a sit. It's usually pretty easy. The dog seems to pick it up, and then you train it at home or at a training class, and the dog can sit pretty much all the time. But then you go to the park where there's a bunch of activity, and the dog just can't sit. So then you feel like, well, he should know this. Well, there's a lot of pieces that are missing from that particular thing that you're asking. So you're asking for a little more than the dog can handle because you didn't train it. So when you're getting ready to test it, you better have a lot of repetitions and a lot of different locations, whatever. Like if you're going to ask a dog to sit in a dog park, you better have trained it in a lot of different places. So the dog's comfortable that no matter where we go, this is what we do. But I think a lot of us get very impatient, and they did it at home, so they expect the dog to be able to do it everywhere else. Because we hear that all the time. Well, he does it fine at home. Oh, I'm sure he does, because he's very comfortable at home and he can handle that at home. But going out into the world is very different. Or a lot of people say, "Oh, we've trained we've trained all this stuff at home." Yeah, but it doesn't matter. The dog, you haven't generalized it to other locations. Do you guys find that's true?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think a lot of times too, like just because your dog does it at home doesn't mean they'll do it anywhere else. Well, they do that great at home, but you haven't taken it on the road to see where you're at. And so I spent a lot of time proving behaviors in a comfortable environment for my dog so that he can get better repetitions and have a better pattern of understanding of what is expected. And then I'll take them to different locations and say, can you do this here? And I don't think a lot of people do that. So.
Right. Well, and the thing is, she proves it at home.
Yep.
See that part? You have to prove it at home. For example, can your dog sit while you're reaching in to get a cookie from the cookie jar?
Mm-hmm.
Can your dog sit when you open the door and you ask the dog to sit? So if you're still having trouble in those areas, asking him to sit outside is going to be harder, right? You're not going to get that fluency and those repetitions and that proofing at home where you can take it on the road. And the other thing too is one of those things, like for example, you're able to put like you're able to bounce a ball and he can sit at home. So you're not going to do that outside in the park. You're going to go back to just a real easy sit. Can you just sit down? Whatever.
I think it goes back to like stimulus gradient, right? So duration, distance, intensity of stimulus, and then like making it so easy for the dog that it is not. So like remember when we teach a behavior, you can't teach a brand new behavior in a novel environment. You have to do it in an environment where the dog is it's predictable, the dog knows what's going on, because then their processing is different, because then it becomes more it's easier for them to acclimate in the home environment and make that change and have that understanding than when you're trying to teach a brand new behavior in a novel environment. And I think that's it's information for people. You want to create it as a pattern where it's not affecting the prefrontal cortex, and then you adjust where the dog is at in terms of if I go to, like you said, to this environment, I'm not going to say, okay, you're going to stay at, I'm going to go 50 feet away because that's where we're at home. It's not the same. So breaking it down into small slices and going back to the beginning, I think is really difficult for people. And I don't know if that has to do with the fact that like we are trying to impress someone or what the case is. Because to me, it's not about that. It's, I want those life skills in a different environment.
And I do agree that sometimes when we're out and about, because I can't tell you how many people have said, oh, it's very embarrassing that my dog doesn't know. He should know by now. It's like, no, why? Right?
Mhm.
I always ask the question. That's always my favorite question. Why should he know it? What did you do to prove that, or to teach him that behavior in that other environment, right? And that's one of the great things. That's why I enjoy Nosework so much, because it's pretty predictable. If you go here, you hear the search cue, this is what happens. And it helps dogs that tend to have little difficulties in different environments, a more predictable situation, and they know what's to be expected and what happens, and it does build their confidence in a big way. So that's one of the wonderful things about Nosework. The competitions are fun too, but it's not about that for sure.
But I think you hit a good point, right? Predictability provides predictability in a way, like when the dog knows exactly what's expected next, they don't have to think about what to do. It's a habit, right? And so then it's something that they don't have to think about. It's like us driving to work every day. How many of us remember every single thing you pass every day that you go to when you're going to work? It's only things that are like out of the norm that you're like, that's notable. Like the other day when I was driving there and I happened to be late or was like rushing because there was a accident and it happened. I'm like, that's different. That doesn't usually happen. But my behavior remained the same because I had a predictable path. And I think it's important for people to realize that predictability provides safety, and they don't have to think about as much. So, you have to say this is the same pattern of behavior, but the environment might change. So it's interesting to me that we don't consider that enough for dogs.
Right. Well, and Joanne has a foster dog that has some anxiety, and you could see I've seen such big changes in that dog since she's had him, because now he knows what's going to happen. He's got lots of predictability in his life, and so he's like, okay, I can handle some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Right, Joanne? Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. He's his big issue was anxiety around people, and so much so that he would growl. And we've been playing a lot of retreat and games like that try to create no pressure people, right? But in life, there's always unpredictables, and so just like you try and tell someone, like, no, don't lean down and don't do this, and they're like, that's normal human behavior, right? So even through that, I have to start doing things to him, right, that are a little weird, where he's like, so I get a cookie that way too, right? But so providing those small changes, like Lisa was saying, right, in the environment, which in this case is what do people do, right? So you'll still get a cookie. They'll still not going to try and reach out to pet you. They're still not going to, right? And trying to provide him that before we hit the stranger. And that, I think, is what one of the big things that's really helped to move him along. So
Right.
we didn't want testing necessarily, but that's what we get thrown into when he has to come with me, right?
Right.
Well, and the truth is, today he did get tested, and again, inadvertently. But see, that the important thing is he got tested today. Somebody was walking kind of a different gait, and Joanne had the dog, and it did get his attention, but he was able to handle that pretty well in that moment. Where a week or two ago, no, not so much, right? So it was a little bit more predictable for him. So even though it did get his attention, he had enough good repetitions in that environment for him to go, okay, it's a little scary, but usually I get cookies, or I still get, there's a good reinforcement. And that's what I mean. So like a dog like Roscoe, you wouldn't, while he's improving every week and every day, and he's doing better, you wouldn't take him to a parade because he couldn't handle that environment. But you see, those are some of the giant leaps people make. He's doing great. Okay, he's able to be around people at a training facility without having too much issue, and people think they could just take that and go to, a parade.
Well, it's like going from like 5th grade to like college. It's such a leap, and I don't think people like we are so as a society. I don't know what the deal is, but like for kids and stuff, it's not like, we raise them that way. We have higher expectations of dogs over children, but we spend a lot more time with educating and working with children than we do with our own dogs. And this is like, it's relative, right? So those people who are like inundated with dogs or working with dogs, they are, it's a different situation. We are able to see different things, but that's why we have, training classes and working with people to help them see that. Whereas with like I tell people, okay, fine. Once you have this behavior, where are you at in terms of your distraction level? Are you at pre-kindergarten? Are you at 1st grade? Are you at, are you in high school? Where are you at in terms of your distraction level? And I think it's important for people to understand that. It's like, there's different pressures. And I remember yesterday when I went in there, I had to put my dog in the room and stuff. And Ross was like, who are you? What are you doing here? I'm like, hey, I have cookies. I throw cookies at him. He's like, oh, cookies? Okay, I could maybe do this. And he was better with it. And then I gave everybody cookies all around for everybody. And, but the difference is that, understanding the behavior, you want to, and you have those trickier dogs, you want to surround yourself with people who understand that versus want to flood and say, everybody loves me, touchy to the dogs. I think that's another important piece of it as well.
Right. Well, it's a big piece of it. So, because believe me, the line between training and flooding gets really tricky sometimes. So flooding is basically where you just inundate the dog with whatever worries him, and like if it's people, which is why we get so many dogs that bite, or they get pushed beyond a point that they can't recover, and it just causes a great deal of stress. So and I think a lot of people, they fall off that. They do a lot of flooding without meaning to. Like they don't mean to do it, but they do. So, for example, and especially this is very common in young adolescent dogs. Sometimes dogs go through some fear periods, or they're worried about something, and people are like, well, they have to get used to it. So instead of just calming down, waiting, maybe doing something else, and revisiting the situation a few days later or a week later, They make a big deal out of it at that moment. And that all that could have, and then it becomes a big deal for the dog forever.
Right.
So, and I can speak to agility because I used to see this a lot in agility. Well, he's afraid of the teacher. Just get him over it. Just get him over it and do it 20 times and he'll be fine. No, a lot of times those dogs never will be able to do a teeter. It's just easier to stop, take a break, do something else, try it again a couple of days later and see what happens. Because a lot of times the dog's fine with it, or they'll be able to recover, or they're able to do something. They're able to do something closer, and they won't be scared of that. But we don't do that. We want them. Well, they got to get used to it. Yeah, they do, but it doesn't have to be today. It could be, it's down the road. So.
Right. Well, or you take it back to the true training piece of it. Well, how do I slice it thin enough that it becomes okay, right?
Right.
Like, can you go on a wobble board? Can I put 12 squares under the teeter so it only moves a half an inch, right? Is that okay? And when they say it's not okay, you have to believe them.
Right. Because I always tell people, you got to go slow to get there fast. And it is a true statement. So one of the things that I wanted to think about when you're training your dog, what is your goal for that training session? What do you want to achieve, right? And I think that'll help people really think about being in a training mindset versus a testing. So, for example, I'm going to do, I want my dog to sit and give me really, 4 really good sits. Well, that might take you a couple of tries. But once you reach that criteria, you're going to be done. And then you're going to see how they progress it. Or now I want to have some 4 good, quick sits outside in front of my house. And then if you don't make that, then okay, we're going to have to go back in the house and work it some more and then try it again. And that's what I mean about being in a training versus testing. You're always testing what you're doing with your dogs. It's just sometimes we test it too soon, right? And the dogs can't handle it. And then instead of going back, what we do is push it a little harder, right? So that's what makes it, then that's where the wheels come off, as I say, in the training. So especially like a recall, I would like a lot of reps on a recall before before I test it, right? Because if you test a recall and it doesn't work out, you got problems, right? So you want to make sure that you test it a lot before you take it on the road, for sure.
I think the other part too, more than I think everything's important, but I think it goes back to your relationship with your dog, right? So like my dog has to trust that I have their back. My dog has to know that I'm looking out for their best interest. And I think a lot of times that when we try to test stuff, we are so bound or determined to move towards that end goal that we will sacrifice the dog and the dog's needs, the dog's body language in order to get what we want. And I think, and I've seen this a lot. And of course, you see it in a lot of teenagers. I mean, from a sheltering perspective or rescue perspective, and I'm sure anybody who does rescue knows, and this is really difficult for us, is the dog comes home and you want to hurry up and make their lives whole. And then when they do that, so like I've had dogs that have been returned because the owners decided for the first night it's a good idea to let the dog sleep in bed. Let's hurry up and make their life perfect. But there's a transition period. You don't go to a new country and start acting as they do. You kind of observe and figure things out before you actually start to acclimate yourself. And that takes time. And I don't think people understand that. So then we set these dogs up to fail. And then of course, something bad happens. Somebody gets hurt, somebody gets a fight, because we push too much too soon. And I'm like, it's just not fair. But it goes back to it. And I think there's various aspects of training and testing, but I also think it comes back to you have to develop and have a good relationship with your dog first in benign environments before you start looking at, can you handle this? Can you deal with going to a new situation and trust that I can read you and get you out of that situation if it's not safe or you don't feel like it's safe?
Right. And to piggyback on that, that's why we wanted to do this Facebook Live. Like, you have to, sometimes you have every intention of having a great training session, and sometimes it doesn't happen.
Right.
And you have to be okay with saying, okay, it didn't go well. I guess probably we should go home and try to get tomorrow, right? We get so goal oriented, and that we don't understand that this is too much for the dog. The dog can't handle that in the emergency, right? So yeah, you definitely want to have. And again, going back to the stimulus gradient, you want to definitely talk about like the duration of the exercises. How far away? How long are you going to work it? And again, the younger your dog is, less is more. I promise you. Doing 2 minutes of having 2 really good minutes of training once or twice a day, every day, is better than having 1 hour long horrible training session, and that the dog is really going to be unhappy with. So,
and it affects your relationship, right? Both ways. It affects you because you're wanting to achieve something, so it becomes disappointing. And then for the dog, it could be a rehearsal of you're not hearing me, you're not listening to me, you're not seeing me. Therefore, how could I even possibly trust you? And you guys know, like when we first go into any kind of privates, my first question is like, what's going on? Who are you? Who does your dog think you are? Who are you to your, how do you handle your dog situation? So like today there was a situation where they're like, well, there's a brand new rescue dog and stuff like that. And I'm like, here's what I see, here's what's happening, and this is what we need to work on. But they kept saying, sit, 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 because the dog knew it at home. And they come into a new environment, and the dog's super social, very auditory, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you can't stop adding to all the sound. It's confusing the dog. So we try to give them too much information too soon. And in that particular case, then it becomes overwhelming to the dog. They can't really hear you, and they only hear background noise. So then they just react accordingly. And that was the same situation with this dog. So then I was like, first of all, you guys are adding to the energy. So let's pull the dog off to the side. So I handled the dog, and then the dog settled down. But I noticed like a plane went overhead, and she like looked. She heard first, and then she looked. And I was like, sit. And she's like, can't process. Need a minute. And I'm like, can you sit now? And then finally she oriented to me. She's like, okay, I can sit now. And I was like, perfect. And I think we push too much, like you say, like, like we all know. It's like, and I know when I do it, I'm like, and as a trainer, there are times where I'm like, well, I wonder if I try it. And then, oops, too much. Okay, let's step back. And I think that's different, right? I mean, it's okay to try it and see what happens, but it has to be in an environment that is safe and that you don't have overwhelming expectations, or your goal isn't higher than the risk of your dog, if that makes sense. So
yeah. And yes, Linda, if you have a terrier, less is always more. Absolutely. No doubt. So the other thing, so this goes, and I'm going to touch upon it a little bit for competition, right? And this is where you see it. I mean, you see it all the time. You see it whether it's a family dog or a competition dog. People want to, let's go into a trial and see how it works. So here's a problem this is the problem I have with that. Number one, you're putting additional stress on your dog that is unnecessary, right? Because if you prepare your dog and your dog is ready, there's no need to put that added stress, right? If you wait. The other thing is putting him in that environment that big testing environment isn't probably the time and place to test to see how your dog is doing. There's a lot of other stuff you can do to test it. So it's an interesting little why we are in such a hurry to do it. And especially those of us that have young dogs, you just want to hurry up and get there. And it's like, no, there's no hurry. Go slow to get there fast. I'm telling you, it's well worth your while, your time to put a little time of effort and put into it, because then when you do go in there, you're going to do well. And also for some dogs, putting them under that very stressful environment and like takes all the fun out of it. And then that's where you have motivation problems with whatever sport, agility, nose work, barn hunt. Then it's like, I don't know. He just seems like he doesn't want to do it. Yeah, probably not. because you made it not fun. Because one of the things is, especially in that environment, testing in that way, you are not the same person you are when you're training. You're a completely different person. You're more stressed. You have a lot more going on. All eyes on you. All of those things that then make stress the dog out. So you have to definitely give the dog the skills, the technical skills, so that they can deal with your nerves and your stuff. And they've done it enough that they know what's happening and they know what to expect. They know the pattern of behavior. This is what's going to happen now. But if you don't have the dog doesn't have that they're going to be like, oh my God, you're kind of weird. This is a new place. I don't know what's going to happen. It's a whole big thing. And so, because I've had people, oh, well, just put him in there and see what happens. Well, you might, especially if you want to be in it for the long haul, you might kill it right there because you might have develop problems that you don't currently have that you may then develop or foster in the dog. So.
And the thing I think we also need to remember is that the dog's olfactory is so much more advanced than we even realize, that when we are under stress, we produce stress hormones, right? And that totally is a big fat clue to the dogs, like something is not right here. So, like Nancy had said, we're not the same. I remember when I ran Max. Remember the first time I ran Max in agility? Oh my God. I was like, oh my God, I was such on a high. And then I was like, I need a cigarette. I was just like, holy cow, that was insane and exciting and so forth. And he was as jazzed as I was and so forth. And I was like, I was shaking. I was so jazzed. And I think, and then thereafter, because we did such a good job for our first time out, it kind of set the expectation in new environments. But now as a young trainer and learning, I inadvertently put a lot more stress on my dog. So then he started getting the zoomies. I was like, you've done this before, remember? And he's like, look, it's yellow. Let's fly it off it. We don't have to touch it. And, I'm a Papillon. We fly. And so, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So, I've learned a lot in that regard. So I've had to really lower the expectations. But he helped me learn quite a bit about how to handle that. But it's true. I mean, we get super jazzed and excited because, oh my gosh, you did better than I even thought. And that's the other piece of it. It's like we have to, compensate our friggin', our expectations because, even though they do a great one time doesn't mean that's going to be forever.
Right. Yeah. And always going back to the foundations and to the basics is really, really important to keep that, keep the dog excited and happy and again, giving him the information he needs to be able to continue doing what you're asking. So a trial or a event like that would not be where I would see, let's see what's going on. You want to be relatively sure that you've put your dog, given enough, your dog enough skill that he's going to be able to handle the technical part well, so he can deal with your nerves or your worry or whatever it is, right? And again, I'm speaking specifically for trials. So one of the things is you definitely want, like I said, for trials too, you want to have a goal or a criteria for that trial. And that's one way to do it. Well, I want to see if he can do the weave pulls really well in competition. Well, that might mean that the rest of your run may not look really great. And your goal is to do a good set of weave pulls. Then you really have to mean that. That's what you're going to work and focus on. So the rest of your run may not be great, but that one's going to be, that's what your focus is. And I know it's really difficult when you're in a trial and you have people looking at you. So it's something that you want to figure out. Can you handle that? Can you deal with that? Can you really do that, right? And say, hey, I'm only going to care about the weave pulls and I don't care what anybody thinks. Because that's a big problem too when we get out in the world. And not only in competition. I can't tell you how many people walking down the street, the dog's just, not behaving and they just get so upset. And it just becomes a really bad dynamic, right? Especially if they put them in a testing situation that wasn't really that was way above the dog's ability to handle it. So it's one of those things that you want to make sure your dog handles that, or have the grace to go, you know what, we're not ready for this. Let's just move on. But like Lisa said, we want to do it. We want to be there. We want to see how they handle it, and that's where that's where the wheels fall off, because then the dog can't trust that you're going to watch their back, and then they're going to be it just puts them in a bad situation. So
I remember Lucas. So Lucas, like I joke and say, he has the reckless abandon gene in him. He's very aroused, and I built agility as a thing because I was very much into it, and still am, but in a different way. And I remember like us going to trials and stuff, and he had a start line problem because he was like, let's go. And he'd bark, bark, bark. He'd bark so hard, he'd be sliding up the line. And I'm like, I don't like it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to run really fast if I'm going to try to beat him. Well, that never worked. So then, and Luke's like, yeah, let's go. And I was like, oh my goodness, poor buddy. And so then I realized that our issue had more to do with our start line and his ability to be patient, right? Versus let's do the course, because it wasn't that he couldn't do the course. It was that he was too impatient. And then I was responding off of his reaction, which only exacerbated the issue and made it worse, because then I fed into his arousal. And then I'm like, let's run fast. And then finally I was like, yeah. So then I had to say, guess what? My requirement is that you maintain that hold, that position, and not jumping forward when I'm getting ready to do a lead out on my agility run. And so I had to sacrifice different runs because I was like, I don't like it, because we were rehearsing what I didn't want. So yeah. And so that I had to step back and redo that because I found a hole in my training. And so in order to make everything else run a little more smoothly, I was like, well, we need to fix this first, because I don't know about many of you, that anybody who trials knows that trialing requires money. And so the donation of, my dog cannot handle a start line. I'm like, thank you, we're done, because my dog can't. So I had to step off, and I was like, oh, okay, note to self, things to work on.
right.
So,
And Lisa brings up a really good point. One of the things that people see themselves as a failure if the dog can't do the behavior. And again, I'm not only talking about trials, but if like you've been working on loose leash walking in a busier environment, and you end up in an environment where you're busy but you can't, the dog doesn't handle it. It's not that you failed. It's that, okay, we need to work a little more on this. We need to proof it a little better. Instead of seeing it as a failure, it's this is an opportunity for us to clean things up a little bit. So, because that's, I think a lot of people see themselves as that. And then also, and society doesn't help either, because I can't tell you people, those people's dog was so out of control. They were blah, 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 blah. And it very well could be true, but we have people that are working on reactivity and stuff that come to our place. People are like, oh my God, that dog is this and that. Yeah, but they've been working on it. They're here to get better and to improve. So one of the cultures, one of the things I want to have in my business, I know Lisa and I are both very similar to this. It's like a culture of support and tolerance, right? It's like, let's help each other when you see somebody struggling. Like, for example, if you see somebody struggling to come in the building, it's not because the dog's just bad. So stop closing space if the dog's not handling it. Just stop moving. And it's really nice to see when people do give each other that support.
Yes.
It's lovely. It's beautiful. They're strangers, but they're giving each other the support they need to navigate the environment. And I think that's what I think sometimes we lack. And so just say, okay, you did great here, and just wait, or I'll hold the door open if you can get in, and all those things like that, so that people are successful, right? And they do their training. Because one of the things, and I see it a lot at the facility, if we're teaching, let's see, attention and focus and learning a little bit, especially in the beginning, that's how you should come in the building. But people think the training only happens in that room. It happens from the minute you get out of your car until you get in the building, right? That's when that's when that's when training is. It's all the time. It's in real time. The dog, if you let the dog drag you into the building and then you're working on loosey walking and then let him drag you out of the building, so that what are we really what are we teaching the dog? So having that criteria again is really, really important. Saying, okay, we're going to get there a few minutes early and we're going to work on not pulling on the leash. I also had to do that with my own dog. I had 2 young dogs and I was only trying to get the 20 feet from my car to the inside the building. And I had to go do 1 puppy at a time because I had 2 puppies at the same time. But my criteria wasn't a perfect heel.
Right.
But can you come out of the car like a dog with training and wait and come out and go in the building? So the first piece I had to work on was when I open that crate door, you're not going to bust out of there like a crazy person, right? You're going to wait until I put the leash on you and then you're going to come out. So that's what I mean about criteria. So it will fail if the dog, it's like, okay, the dog can't stay in the crate, but then you want him to, they jump in like out of the crate like a crazy person from the car. And of course they're already amped up and of course they're going to drag you across the parking lot to get to class. So everything has to be done calm. And you know what? As much as I know a lot of people don't like to be late, I would rather be late and advocate for my dog and get the behaviors I want than to worry about being on time and most instructors, at least at my facility, will totally get that and understand it. Like, okay, you're going to take your time or whatever.
But I also think the difference is that in terms of trainers, and I know all 3 of us are very similar in the way that we work. It's like the quality of connection and relationship is of the utmost importance over anything else, because truly these are pets first and foremost. Everything else they do after that is icing on the cake.
Right.
And I think that it is critical for people to, or anybody who's working with dogs, to realize that it's a process, number one. And it also starts from point A. Point A is at the car, or if they're going for a walk, their house, to going to the walk and so forth. And to find that community of support is, I think, very challenging for a lot of people. And it also depends on the training style of whoever you're working with. Like me, I remember, the other day I was there doing classes. I'm like, I really don't care if your dog can do a sit stay and you can walk around them within 6 weeks of training class. What I care about is that your dog cares about you and you care about your dog, and you guys will gain a lot more mileage and so forth if your dog, like, you understand that about who your dog is and they understand you, that you have their back. So
right. And then that's the other misnomer. Most people, like, as we alluded to earlier, for children and all that, it's a long time to educate a child. Granted, our lifespan, the human lifespan, is much longer than the dog lifespan. But people want to be able to come to a class for 6 weeks and have a trained dog. I'm like, I want that too.
I don't know. And right. And let's talk about it. Right. I mean, this is where we get all into the whole types of training and stuff. Can you get behaviors where they're just, you can suppress all what you need? Hello. Suppress to get the behaviors you want. Yeah, you can, but it's still then not solid, right? Because there's a suppression of behavior. And then when the dog has an opportunity, if somebody suppresses me, I'm like, okay, I can't do that here, but I'm going to go nuts when I have an opportunity to do so. Right. And I don't think people understand that. It's like, you can, in the area that I'm at, there's a lot of suppression of behavior and so forth. And I'm like, but your behavior's it's not solid. It's not predictable. It's not something that, for sure your dog will do, because I know that if something happens and I happen to drop the leash, I know my dog's going to go, hey, Mom, did you know you dropped the leash? They're going to look at me like, did you mean to do that? Or is this a test? What's happening here? And I am grateful for that, because instead of saying, woohoo, I'm free, Catholic schoolgirl running naked around the beach, right? Doing that, they're more apt to say, did you mean to do this? Or are we doing something different here? They're willing to check in with me because our relationship is strong. And I think that is really important, that, first and foremost, that's where everything happens. The sexy stuff, I think we underrate all the foundation stuff that's really critical to help dogs be successful in our world. And we overrate all the sexy stuff. Because honestly, I would much rather have a dog who can relax in public, not be a nuisance, be connected with me, hang out by my side, than a dog that is taught how to walk on a tightrope. Because guess what? Life skills are not that. That's not important.
Yeah, right. We don't walk around on tightrope.
Right.
And so, well, and I'm gonna tell you a quick story. I want to say 9 months ago, maybe about that time, I did a private lesson with a young couple with a lovely little terrier that was very, very anxious and pretty scared and was pretty worried about stuff, and not anxious enough to need medication, but didn't have a lot of life experiences and all that. So I recommended Barn Hunt, and he to build some confidence. And unfortunately, he couldn't handle the class situation. They came and did a little check-in on the class, and it was just too much for the dog. Like the other dogs, the environment was just a little too busy. So we recommended private lessons with one of our instructors, and they did private lessons for several weeks. And then they were able to do a class. And so they've been coming for different things. So I hadn't seen them in a long time. I hadn't seen them because I recommend them. I saw them, and they're taking a canine fitness class with this youngster. The dog, I couldn't believe how great the dog was doing. He was in an environment, there was 2 classes going on, there were other dogs, and he was able to focus on his people and work, and he was so relaxed and so happy, and so were they. I was like, and they put the time and the effort in to have that relationship with that dog. And it was just the best feeling. I'm like, wow. And now that dog has got a great life, and the couple are doing a great job with him. They're keeping him stimulated mentally. They come once a week, to do stuff with him, and the relationship is there. Are they going to compete and do all this fun? No, they're not. They're just there to have a good time with their dog and enjoy each other's company. It was the coolest thing, and I was just over the moon how great the dog looked, how great they were. They used to be very stressed because he was stressed and he was a little reactive. It was a whole thing. I'll be honest, I almost didn't recognize them because that's how relaxed they looked. And it was the dog. I was like, I recognize the dog.
But as a trainer, though, that's why we keep doing what we do.
Yes.
For those things. When the universe throws us a bone, we're like, oh, thank you. Because I don't know, sometimes it's hard. Right?
It was the best.
Yeah. So, not to flip flop from that, because that's what we live for, right? Those stories.
Yeah. Yes.
But I was with Nancy this weekend, and I was having a conversation with her, and I said, a friend of mine, she calls Facebook the Book of Faces, which
so does Molly Mahoney.
Yeah. Which I think sometimes is funny, right? You see these big fancy videos, and you see, all of this training and the trial videos that people post sometimes. And, Lisa made a comment earlier. I'm not going to say what or where, but right. There's a video out there that has over 1 million views. Right. And I know Nancy and I both met the person, and they mentioned proudly, right? My dogs do these things, or they do not eat. Right. That is how we get what we do. If they don't want to work for me, they're not eating today. And, we're like, well, how long does that last? He said, most has been a couple of days, and then they figure out what they need to do. Right. And so it's just horrible because you see these super cool videos like, wow, how much training did that take? And that's so amazing. And look how much success that person or that dog team is having. And like, wow, I wish I could be like them. And you're like, I have no wish in the world to be like that, right? I don't care if my dog can't do a single thing. I will 100% never not give my dog a choice in their training, or treat them that way.
Right. Yeah, because people do it and as a training tool, right? Which is like, so basically it's like us, right? If let's say somebody's like, if you want this peaches chocolate, you're gonna do this for me. I mean, that is a tough. You'll do it, but you're not gonna do it because you wanna. You're gonna do it because you gotta. So that's a whole different training philosophy there, right? It's like you're gonna do it, but not because you want to. It's because you have to. Otherwise, you're not gonna get what especially in the case of food, it is a basic necessity. It's a basic need. So you're gonna remove a basic need to get what you want, so you could have a great, training or whatever. So I feel like, because I mean, we would never do that to a child. If you don't eat this, you're not gonna go to this. Well, maybe.
That happened to me all the time. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
it's a motivator for us. You're like, do this, and then you get to have this. Okay, there's a difference, right? Versus you're removing their opportunities. And I think, you had talked about it, Nancy, about opportunities. So when I'm training my dogs and I'm like, whoops, something to work on, I look at things as opportunities. And that's the other thing too. Like if I know my dog has issues with being present with me over playing with a ball, for example, and my dogs love balls. They love playing with balls, and they do have a hard time in the backyard because I've created that pattern to say, hey, when you go out in the backyard, we're playing ball to do some exercise. And then I'm like, okay, I do some testing to say, all right, can you sit? Can you down if I'm holding the ball in my hand? And I think that's something that's interesting because I've seen this at times where they're like, well, my dog can't function if there's a ball present. Well, then you have bigger issues there, right? And then, well, I just won't compete or I just won't do that if there's a ball present. Well, okay, if you want to micromanage that, that's great. But good luck, because I don't know anything about life that's predictable other than it is unpredictable. It's predictable being unpredictable. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, so today, and then the other thing, and it goes back to about being upset about your training. So, and testing and training. And I'm going to own this one. Joanne was a witness. I did not train my dog to where she needed to be, meaning there are different odors in UKC, and I'll be honest, I forgot all about it, to be honest, and I didn't remind my dogs what that odor pays. And we missed one because she was like, this one doesn't make food come, so I'm not going to tell you about that. So am I going to get upset about that? No, because I didn't train that. So again, tested it before I trained it. So am I going to get upset because she didn't do well? No, because she didn't do well because of me and because I didn't put the training in. So, and that's the thing. I think we get all upset about, well, she didn't do well, blah, blah, blah. I can't believe it. Well, you believe it because I'm sure there was, like you said, there's a hole in that training. There's and that, we didn't set up that expectation properly, right? Like the tennis ball thing. When you compete, sometimes there's going to be a tennis ball, but that's not what gets you paid. That's not what we're doing here. We're doing this. It's a training issue. You have to just teach them that you have to give them the information. This is what gets you paid. This doesn't. And again, you have to train it. It takes time, but you just want to be able to, okay, I'm just going to do this part. And then I'm going to take you out there and you just got to figure out the rest of it. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if it's spending money or like just not having that like endorphin rush of success because, and I'm not going to throw you under the bus here, but it was really funny because the first time it happened, right? the dog got it, but you could tell, and it was something simple, right? It was like a chair hide. And she went 2 or 3 times, and finally the last time, right? And you see Nancy's face, yes, you got it, and you see her face change, like, what happened? Like, and I'm like, does your dog know this? And she goes, no, not really. Right? I haven't worked on it in a long time. And so, but I think, even when you hear us talk about this, right, and not getting upset and not letting those types of things, like, it's hard. And I don't know why. Like, in that moment, you're like, why did they do that? What? And a lot of times for us, it's like, what did we miss? What can we do better? Why is that hole there? Because I thought I was prepared, right?
Right.
And you have to be careful even with that, because if it's a hole, it's not the dog's fault, right?
Right.
And so and she didn't do this, but I've seen it so many times where you're like, no, I'm sorry. And people are like, ugh, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you, because I have one of those dogs, it's, for a more sensitive dog, it's crushing.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
And you can completely rip them of their sense of self-confidence and independence by just if you have a soft dog, something as simple as like, just that, right? Not even correcting or anything like that, just your disappointment. So be careful what you do, right?
Right.
It's a
Well,
reminder.
yeah, and that's what I mean. And I wasn't really disappointed.
No.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was like, no, poop. That was,
Why didn't she get that? It was more of a question, right? Like, why didn't she get that?
yeah, and it was because, right, and that's how it should be. Because, and Kim, you mentioned that you always blame yourself. Yes, like in this case, it was all me on those counts, right? It was all me, but I'm not going to beat myself up about it. I just didn't have the time, or I missed it. It's like, don't be, because that's the other thing. You don't want to erode your self-confidence either, right? Because that you're not a good trainer, or you didn't do the, no, we just, oops, missed that. Gotta go back and work on that, instead of getting upset. And also always looking at it as a learning opportunity. And I'm gonna tell you, it is a tough road. I am a lot better. Yeah, I know. Exactly. That's what I do, because we're gonna do that. Yeah, oops, we're gonna do that. But we also want to, and Joanne's right. Sometimes, because I learned that with Bandit. I remember, Lisa, I used, when we missed something, I'd be like, but it wasn't at the dog, it was me.
And then he'd yell at you and bark. He's like, what is wrong with you? How come you're such a loser? Whereas,
and luckily he wasn't that soft of a dog, but
no.
But it did, there was a little bit of a bump hit there. And sometimes it feels like you're never going to get it, or you're never going to understand it, but I promise it will come. I felt that way with my beloved black lab. I thought I'm never going to teach her how to walk on a leash, because
why you gotta pick leash walking?
Yeah, it was so hard. She had such a hard time, and it took a long time. But now she's wonderful. She's perfect. Like, she's not perfect, but she's where I want it to be. She's met my criteria, and she consistently does it. My young shepherd, though, he did get it sooner, but I had to go back to, remind him on stuff as he got more mature. And again, maturity is a big part of it, right? And so you want, and especially those of you with young dogs, I know a few of you that are on have very young dogs. You're going to test it today, train it, test it, train it. But remember, because of where they are in their development, when you go in and test it, it might be disastrous. So you're like, okay, then you're going to be like, oh my God, no, it just could be a developmental situation. So just pause, go back, train a little more, and try again, because you cannot dictate when they're going to mature and when they're going to be, where you want them to be. So you're going to have to keep checking it more often. And sometimes for a young dog, I don't recommend a lot of testing ever. I just do a lot more training when they're puppies up until they're about 1.5 years, 2 years old. I do a lot more training there. I don't do a lot of testing when they're that young, because that, things can go pretty bad if they're not ready, right?
We were talking about this the other day. There was a little Sheltie and that I've been working with and stuff like that. He's been a little sensitive, and mom wants to do therapy work with him. And then recently he's been like, everything's kind of scary outside of the home. And we talked about it, and I was like, it's just interesting. And I said, it's okay not to train right now. Cut you guys some slack right now, because he's going through something. The worst thing you can do is train it or work it and then make it a thing. And then he becomes hyper aware of that particular situation, which will then, cause problems with your relationship on top of you're not going to get where you want to go. I mean, sometimes it's okay to put him on, I know you hate this word, idle. Stop it. You can put them just put them back a little bit. But I think a lot of times there's this big rush to like hurry up and be the first dog to do this and this and that. And I'm like, okay, it's still my dog. And I'm glad that they can accomplish certain things, but I still want them to be healthy, happy, and well-rounded. But in this particular case with this dog, I was like, it's okay. Release yourself of that pressure, because he's going through something right now that we don't know exactly, and we just need to change our technique and see how that works. So, and I'd said that, so we come out of the house, you go to the right and there was the cul-de-sac, you go to the left and there was the road with cars passing. And as that kind of dog, he was wanting to chase the cars, but he would also shut down. He's like, I'm not going over there, because when mom tried it before, early on in his training, he just gave up. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. So he had learned that if I don't want to, I don't have to. And then plus he was going through a sensitive thing. So then we changed the techniques. And I said, what if you go out and go towards the road and I hold your dog and you're like, okay, see, I'm leaving. And then we changed the look of the picture for him. And he was like, Mom, what are you doing? And he stopped for a minute. He did a little bit of smelling and sniffing because he wasn't uncertain. But he's like, wait a minute, my mom's over there. So I held the leash and he ran up to her, and we're right next to the road. And he was like, all right, this is just what we do. So I think we have to also let ourselves understand that, like you said, they do go through that, the situation of growth. And the thing is that they're with us for such a short time. We forget that. And we really have to reel ourselves back in and realize that they are sentient, unique beings as well.
Yeah. So. And, Lisa made a comment for those people who do competition. And it was so funny that you said it, because I think I had mentioned it to Nancy like a week or two ago. And I said, think about all of the like firsts, the titles, right? Can you name one of them? One, right? Or what breed it was, or who it was, or what, like, so me neither, right? Like, who was the first dog to earn, a triple championship? No. I have no idea. I don't even know what breed of dog that was. Right. And so when we have these moments of like, I want to be the first or the youngest or the, just think about that for a minute. If it's a personal goal for you, I get that, but you're not the only one involved in that journey, right? And so if the dog's not signing up for that, you can just damage so much along the way. So it's better to wait and really, really get there together and enjoy it together. And I promise you'll have more fun on your journey than the rush to get to something no one will remember anyway.
Right. Only you'll be the only one that will remember. Whoever achieved it is the only person that really remembers it, that really has made
Right. And your dog, who hopefully doesn't go look back and go, that really sucked.
Yeah.
Right. It depends on you.
Right. So one of the things, if it helps, and if for some of those, it doesn't help for all of us, but for some people, if you're having a training session or you're working on stuff, write it down. What do you want to achieve in that training session? However long it is, it could be 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever it is. What do you want to achieve in that time frame? And what's your ultimate goal? And you don't, with dogs, when you're involved with someone else, when another being, having timeline is really hard, right? It's
Mhm.
best to, if it's only you, like if you want to be the best gymnast, you can have that goal of, I'm going to work on this and do all these things and achieve that goal. Versus if you have a dog, they didn't sign up for that, so you may or may not get there at the time in the timeline you want. But if that's a goal, you can, it's something to work towards with your dog, right? And have, and it should be something to build that relationship, and whether it's being able to go for a walk, being able to do all these things. Again, it's not automatic. You have to train it and test it and train it and test it. And that's what I think we do. We're in test mode or in the real world, uh, you know, way too much. And we don't get a chance to train the dog and work on it. Well, when are we going to get off treats? I don't know, when the dog says, and you will come off it. Like, for example, I don't give my dog a treat every time he sits now, because he should know that by now. And I also don't give him a treat if he walks past another dog. I already worked on that. He already knows that. So there's no treat for that, right? You do it when you're in the learning phase, and then eventually you're going to randomize it. But it's not like, that's not what we're talking about. The training is, can you do it? And you get, you might not have a cookie on me. It might be, further away or whatever it is. Right.
I think one of the things I think that's important to know, it's like I tell people, like, anytime you're working with, there are things in life, there's no textbook 1, 2, 3, 4, the steps that you take and when you're done and this and that, because there are things in life that are not predictable, and you have to kind of go with the flow. So I think basically what we're talking about is the ability to flex in between training and testing, because if I'm testing then and I see that it's going awry, I'm like, okay, back to training while we're in the same moment, because then I have to lower my expectations. So like things that are not predictable in life or have rhyme or reason, it's fluid and you have to be in the moment with that individual, are being married, right? Because everything changes here and there. Raising children and working with animals. You have to be flexible. And I think that's a hallmark of an instructor or a trainer that is gifted in terms of being able to flex at that time. Uh-oh, I see eyeballs.
Yeah.
Eyeballs getting big. What? Speaking of marriage.
Yeah. We do a Facebook Live every week, and he decides he's going to have a conversation with me when I'm on.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, so Mary put asked an interesting question. How many failures do you accept before you go back to more foundational behavior in your training? The rules of three. Rule of three. If you have three, if you see the same behavior 3 times, stop and change something. If you like it, keep on keeping on. Woohoo! If you don't like it, you need to change something and see. But it's the rule of 3. You're not going to keep. If you're having a lot, if you're trying to teach your dog to sit, and you can't, and he fails 4 or 5 times, you have to change something before then. 3 times.
Go back to luring, helping him.
Yep. Or go back to another environment.
Right. Do something.
If something's not happening for you, you need to change something. You need to change something. The dog is telling you. You don't keep doing it because then the dog keeps failing, because that is a bit of vicious. You have to change something, and you have to figure out what is causing the dog not to be able to do the behavior. And you just don't keep on until he maybe gets it eventually. No, 3 times. If he fails, boom. Change something.
I'll tell you, there was a dog. It was a smooth coat border collie that I was fostering. I go to open the door. He was so jazzed. He's like, open the door, open the door. That hyper fixation. And I'm like, ew, I don't like that. And so then he was like, open the door. And I went to open the door and I didn't open it fast enough. So he nipped me in the heel. And I'm like, wait a minute. Did I just see that? Was that just something that, wow. So I said, okay, let me see if I see it again. So I tested it again. I was like, is this really a thing? Because if it is, I need to fix it, because that's not okay. And in his case, it was a thing. And so I know by the second time, I was like, well, this is not acceptable, because on the third time, forget it. We've got patterning, and I already know it's a pattern by the second time, right? And it was the same scenario, though, set up completely the same thing. And I remember the second time he did it, I grabbed him by his collar and I said, have you lost your little mind? Sit. And he's like, oh, is that bad? And he sat, and that's all it took, because I stopped it immediately. And I think those are things too to remember. It's like, yeah, you see patterns of behavior, but one, consider the situation, consider the repetitions in the same session. We know that when people come in, they say, I see this, I have this issue. Well, well ahead what the issues are, because you see the repetition of behavior when you're working with that person, right? And then you're like, well, I already knew that. And this is how we need to address it. So, trainers are pretty, well, some of the ones that I know of are pretty savvy about saying that's a repetition of behavior and we need to address it right off. And I think that when Mary, you're talking about it, how many times? Yeah. If you see it a couple of times, 2-3 times, yeah, you need to stop and say, what's different? How can I make this easier? And how can I bring my point across? So
clearly the dog's under, it's like talking to somebody that doesn't speak English. You're going to present it one way, then you might go another way. You might try to say it another way so they can understand what you're trying to tell them. Right.
Right. And I always, when we talk about like this scenario, I always like to tie it back, because every dog owner in the world gets this. How easy is it to train a dog to jump and steal stuff off your counters? How many times does that take?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like 3 times? You don't need 3, right? But at the same time, like, how do you take dogs that are uber food motivated and will like bust through a wall to get to food? And like, you can leave a steak on the counter and they wouldn't dream of touching it. You know what I mean? So it's all about not letting those patterns create themselves, because once those pathways get built, it is so hard to break them. Right. And if you know anything about counter surfing, man, 6 months later, the dog's like, they still remember, and they still think about that one time they got that sandwich or the piece of bread or whatever. So
one time, right? Highly reinforcing.
And to be fair, and that's one of the things, going back to resource guarding, a lot of times we have resource guarders come after years of practicing that behavior. That is why resource guarding, in my experience, of all the behavior issues I've dealt with, is the most challenging, because they have years and years and years of practice before people come. The only time I've had major successes is when they're puppies. If you see that resource guarding develop as a puppy, it's easier to break that habit, because they don't have those patterns of behavior and all those repetitions on that behavior.
But on that topic, on resource guarding topic, I also feel like people try to find information and they're given all the wrong information. Pet it when it's feeding, and play with its food. I'm like, you know what? If I'm eating and somebody tries to take my food, I'm gonna stab them with my fork and my knife. Don't touch it. I'm working. Right. I'm working on this. I mean, that's me. But most people don't know that about me. But I like my food. Yeah. So but don't be touching me. Yeah, I'd be bad. Yep. But but that's the case, and I think people get a lot of bad information. I'm like, don't do that. Don't. Yep. And they perpetuate it worse.
And dogs are different, right? So yes, there are methods that work, but not everything works for every single dog. And I will tell you, I saw it for the first time in Roscoe last week. So he had like a cow ear or something, and I was trying to move him from one place to the other. And I was like, come on, buddy, come on. And he wouldn't move, right? Because he's like, I'm chewing on this. I'm comfortable. I don't want to go anywhere. So I came in and I was like, hey, can I have that? And as soon as I grabbed it, he went, right? And he clamped down on it. And so, like, what do most people do, right? Give me that, back, right? And they yell at the dog, right? They go, so I just held on to it. Now, again, this is specific to this dog, just because I know who he is, right? And I held on to it, and I was like, hey, it's fine. You're all right. We're gonna share this for a minute. Can you come here? And while I'm holding it, right? Can you come here? Come here, right. Like, come on. And he was like, because I just by how he reacted, I can tell exactly what history he had with that, right? And I didn't pull it. I just held on to it. And finally he was like, I don't know what to do here. And I'm like, can you out? And he's like, oh, okay. And the moment he let it out of his mouth. I was like, come on. And I used it as a lure, right? And I got him to where I wanted him to go, and I gave it right back to him. And he was like, well, that was different.
Right. But that was a lot of that too, was because you have worked really hard to develop a relationship with him because you have him as a foster, right? And so we're in another situation. If that person would have been more like adamant about no, and made it adversarial, and it's like, you're giving this to me, he was like, you in what army? And then would have escalated. And I think a lot of times, like, you know, it all goes back to relationship. I mean, it's all the same stuff. Every time we talk, it's all the same stuff. You have to have a good relationship with your dog, regardless of what it is. And then he's going to be more inclined to say, okay, maybe this isn't quite what I hoped for, but you seem like you know what you're doing, so I'm going to go through with that.
Right.
Yep. And so you take testing versus training, right? That needs 1,000 times more testing before I send that off to a home, right?
Yeah, honey.
Because people, no matter what you tell people, they're going to do what they do and what they think is right? Which a lot of times is like, give me that. So he needs to understand, like, I'll give it back. I promise. You just give it to me for 1 second and we'll trade and it'll be good. And that, like, all of that. So, yep. But again, so even when we talk testing versus training, it doesn't necessarily mean trials, right? It doesn't mean sport competition. This is stuff that's life skills.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what I mean. So that's why I was like, initially I put training and trialing. It's like, no, because it's not really about that. It's about testing, because you are always testing what you're teaching your dogs, whatever it is, right? Do you know sit? Can you down? Can you this? Can you that? And it's like, oh, we've never done it here. And for some, and again, just like anything, some people and some dogs learn faster than others. And there are concepts that you might present to your one dog, if you have multiple dogs, and other concepts, you know, they'll pick up one concept. One dog will pick up one concept faster than the other one. Doesn't mean they're smarter or dumber. It's just that for that dog, that made more sense quicker than the other dog. Yep. So you have to take that into consideration as well. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. And again, use a log to do your training. I'm not a big log person. Yep. But sometimes what I do, and now that with all the technology we have, you have a voice recorder. Yeah. And I use a voice recorder, say this is, if I needed to remember something or to be mindful of something. So whatever works for you and for your situation, it'd be, or video. If you guys are great into people, you know, with all the video stuff, you can videotape it, and then that way you can see, oh, this was good, this wasn't good. So be creative about those kind of things that you're doing and that you're using, so that you can see, like, okay, this was good, and I think he looks ready now to test, you know, to test it. So it doesn't matter what it is, right? Is that, can you stay? Recall is the one that I train and test quite often, because I want that to be pretty solid. And I am very, very confident that my dogs are pretty good at that. So, but I'm still, like this weekend, I tested it, right? My dog's garage door's open. I'm letting him in the garage. I trust, I tested that they're not going to take off and run out the door, and they didn't, right? But I was pretty comfortable, but before I put them in that situation, because I wouldn't have done that when they were, 5 months old, because that wouldn't have gone well. So anyway,
I'll share one quick thing. It was funny. So here's a training moment where I was like, oops, we're not ready. I remember we were on the deck and I let the dogs out, and then we have a pool. My husband was in the pool, and he's like, oh, let so-and-so out, Luke, to come swim or whatever. And I'm like, okay. So I was like, why not just open it up and see what happens? I'm on 3 acres. There's corn next, or soybean next to me, whatever. So I wasn't worried about them taking off too far. Yeah, the border collie did a huge outrun. The cattle dog chased the border collie. Luke went running. Woohoo, we're free, exciting, 15 years old almost. And I was like, and my husband's like, that wasn't a good idea. I'm like, shut up.
You're right, but it's not a good idea.
Don't point that out. We're married.
From non-dog trainer.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that?
I was like, oops. And so I just laughed about it. I'm like, come on. And they came eventually. But they had a little fun, and then they finally came back. But yeah, oops.
Yeah.
I was like, not quite ready.
Yeah, we all have those moments.
Yes.
So Christy mentioned, you know what would be great? That's always when a sentence starts like that.
Yeah, right.
It sounds like it's work. But if an instructor judge might create a suggested list of training goals and testing criteria, possibly even by expectation, which might be social and might be competition. So, uh, yes, and everybody's goals are different. That's why in our training classes we always say we're going to teach you all of these things, but you're going to use what's going to be what you find helpful in your home, right? But yes, Christy, I was talking about it with one of my agility instructors about like you need to do this before you move on to do this. You must have this before you do this. And sometimes video, is a great way to go. So
I got you, Christy. I'll write the positive poodle progression, and I will publish that and get it to you. Okay.
all right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. It was a fun conversation. Thank you for checking in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The lab is like,